Good evening. Good evening, and welcome to tonight's William R. and Linda K. Cotter Discourse and Deliberation event on the tribal sovereignty movement in Maine. I'm Margaret McFadden. I'm Colby's Provost and Dean of Faculty, and on behalf of our President, David Green, who is unfortunately away from campus tonight, and our Board of Trustees, I'm very pleased to welcome Maulian Bryant, the Penobscot Nation Ambassador, and Aaron Dana, the Passamaquoddy Tribal Representative to the Maine House of Representatives, to Colby. We're honored to have you here on campus as leaders of the Penobscot Nation and the Passamaquoddy tribe. Ambassador Bryant and Representative Dana are both tireless advocates for the rights and well-being of Indigenous people in Maine. Their dedication to justice serves as an inspiration to us all, and their leadership exemplifies the spirit of collaboration and dialogue that is crucial for advancing these challenging policy conversations. So we're so grateful to have both of you with us at Colby tonight. Give it up, come on. We are also honored to have Rachel Talbot Ross, Speaker of the Maine House of Representatives, and State Senator Rick Bennett joining us as panelists tonight. Speaker Talbot Ross has dedicated her life to public service and social justice in Maine and was elected by her caucus to be the first Black woman to be Speaker of the Maine House of Representatives. Senator Bennett has served with distinction for 14 years in the legislature and was elected unanimously by his colleagues to be President of the Senate in 2000. Thanks also to both of you for being with us tonight. I would also like to thank the Goldfarb Center and the Wabanaki Alliance for working together to bring this critical conversation to the Colby community. Tonight's discussion is named in honor of former Colby President Bill Cotter and his wife Linda, and I'm so pleased that their daughter Liz is here with us tonight. I think, having worked with Bill for many years, I know he would be really pleased that the Goldfarb Center is bringing these sort of conversations to campus. Conversations that move us away from an us and them mentality, and that focus instead on bringing together people around in unique coalitions, and I think in considering challenging issues from many different angles. So we miss him here. I'd also like to welcome the other dignitaries who've joined us tonight: Chief Newell, Vice Chief Syllaboy, and Waterville Representatives Bruce White and Colleen Madigan, and Senator David LaFontaine. Thank you for being here. The challenges of public service seem to increase on an almost daily basis, I think if you watch the news. So to our panelists and to our elected officials, I just want to say thank you for your service and for your commitment to our communities. And to our students and community members who are here, thank you for taking the time to be part of this conversation, because conversations like this are so important to our community and to the preservation of civic engagement. Finally, I'd like to acknowledge that Colby has more work to do to understand our position as an institution that sits on unceded Wabanaki land. As an academic institution, we recognize the value of deep reflection and conversation, but we must also commit ourselves to the concrete action of articulating our own institutional relationship to Wabanaki history, as well as our own responsibility to the recognition of Wabanaki sovereignty. We hope and expect that tonight's convening will lead us to deeper and more meaningful engagement in this work and in the elevation of Indigenous justice. So just a few words before I turn it over to the panelists, just a little bit of historical context. In 1980, the state of Maine and the U.S. Congress passed legislation known as the Maine Indian Land Claims Settlement Act to resolve a dispute between the federal government and the state of Maine over the illegal sale and seizure of federally protected tribal land. Since then, there have been many legislative and legal challenges to the meaning of the Land Claims Settlement Act. According to the Wabanaki Alliance, quote, "The state's interpretation of the Settlement Acts has resulted in a downgrading of the Wabanaki Nation's sovereign status, rights of self-governance, and ability to benefit automatically from federal laws created for Indian country, effectively reducing them to municipalities. As a direct result of the Settlement Acts, the Wabanaki Nations and the state of Maine have been unable to benefit from more than 150 federal laws passed since 1980, missing out on important opportunities in economic development, healthcare, housing, environmental protections, disaster response, and development of tribal the government services, unquote. In 2020, a bipartisan task force recommended 22 changes to the Settlement Acts to restore self-governance over a range of issues, including criminal justice, the use of natural resources, gaming, taxation, and land acquisition. Most recently, in this last legislative session, Speaker Talbot Ross put forward LD 2004, an act to amend the Maine Indian Claims Settlement Act, which would have adopted one of the task force's recommendations. Although the legislation passed both chambers with large bipartisan majorities, the governor vetoed the bill. The legislature was unable to override the veto, and the bill was defeated. I hope this context is helpful to you as you listen to this conversation, and without further ado, I want to invite Ambassador Bryant to the podium. Thank you.
Did it. I am a short, clumsy person in a long dress. I was sweating that one a little bit. All right. Good evening and welcome. Indaluizi Maulian Bryant, Naganujay Albanawapskeg. I am Maulian Bryant, and I am from the Penobscot Nation, where I am honored to serve as our tribal ambassador. I also serve as the board of directors for the Wabanaki Alliance. I want to echo all of the thanks and appreciation and all of the individuals mentioned were also in my remarks, so ditto the Wabanaki Alliance and the tribes and everyone working on this legislation is so happy that we are here tonight, that we are talking about these things, and that we will hopefully do some really great exchanging and learning and have wonderful discussions tonight going forward. So I also want to acknowledge the Wabanaki Alliance Executive Director, John Diefenbacher-Kroll, who is with us tonight, along with several of the chiefs and vice chief and board members that we've talked about. And I also want to acknowledge Passamaquoddy citizen and attorney and all-around great guy, Corey Hinton. I know he was here last night warming you all up for us, and I am so proud of him. We all are, so I want to acknowledge Corey as well. And of course, Allison and everyone who has organized this and brought us all together. This is such a great opportunity and such a great moment for us all to be here. And thank you to all of you for spending tonight with us. And I know it's a long, busy day, so coming out to learn about tribal sovereignty is an extra lift for you probably today, and we really, really appreciate it. Now I will gush about my dear friends on this panel for a little bit, and then I'll get into some of the work that we've done and how we're going forward. So I want to talk first about Representative Aaron Dana. I was writing this, and it occurred to me, I wrote down, we've known each other for about 30 years, and then it occurred to me it's probably more than that. So Representative Dana, I really love watching him bring his values and pride as a Passamaquoddy person, his personality and humor, and his warrior spirit to the legislature and the Judiciary Committee. It is no secret that the relationship between our nations and the state government is delicate. It is challenging to build trust in an atmosphere like this. Tribal leaders are always having to strike tricky balances. We're having to manage complex relationships, and we're having to exhibit superhuman patience most of the time. Rep Dana does these things masterfully, and we are lucky to have him serving. Willie One Aaron, thank you for being here tonight. Yeah. Moving on to Senator Bennett, I got to know Senator Rick Bennett over Zoom when he reached out and wanted to know more about the tribal sovereignty legislation a couple years back. He approached me with so much respect and an open heart and an open mind, and he really wanted to listen and learn and also bring forward some of his great ideas. He has spoken up in the Senate on numerous occasions for tribal rights, and he's also taken part in tribal events and ceremonies. Senator Bennett really walks his talk and stands up for what he believes in. We are so proud and thankful for the relationship that we've nurtured and maintained with you, Senator Bennett, so thank you for joining us tonight and for all your support. And last but not least, I get to talk a little bit about my dear friend, the incomparable Speaker Rachel Talbot Ross. The Speaker has made Wabanaki tribal sovereignty a priority since she began her work in the legislature, and she has also dedicated her life to working for justice for people of color and all marginalized people. Together, we co-chair the Permanent Commission on the Status of Racial, Indigenous, and Tribal Populations. It's such an important entity for our state, and it is the result of her vision and deep love for helping those who are often overlooked, forgotten, silenced, and disenfranchised. This is how Rachel leads. She gives a voice to the voiceless. She has stepped up to the plate for Wabanaki people and sponsored many of our efforts to right historical wrongs. She has been in the struggle with us, and she has also celebrated progress with us. Thank you, Rachel. We deeply appreciate you, and we're excited to keep going. The 1980 Maine Indian Land Claim Settlement and Implementing Acts have set up a framework around tribal-state relations that is problematic, harmful, and depressive to our people. The Wabanaki Nations had valid claims to 2/3 of this state that was illegally taken from us. The settlement was negotiated in a way that undermines tribal sovereignty, and our leaders accepted it under a set of circumstances not conducive to thoughtful or fair decision-making. They were told this could be amended and changed if it needed to be, and now is the time to do so. Large-scale efforts have fallen flat in recent years, but we have made some very noteworthy progress, and we'll get into that in our panel discussion. When I was a young person, I was in very close proximity to the struggles the Wabanaki were enduring a couple of decades ago. My father, Barry Dana, was chief of the Penobscot Nation. My great-aunt, Donna Loring, was our tribal representative. Both of these incredible leaders saw that I was struggling trying to make sense of the oppression, inequity, and sometimes bigotry that I was seeing when it came to how the state interacted with our people in our homelands. I was also trying to figure out my identity as a young Penobscot woman, and I had all of these great feelings of comfort and joy and pride in my people. So when I saw that threatened or harmed by how we were perceived and treated by others outside of our communities, it presented a conflict that can be hard for a young person to deal with. I'm so thankful that these two mentors of mine, these tribal leaders that I love so dearly, guided me and engaged me in tribal issues. They empowered me by making me feel like I was part of the solution. I was testifying on bills, attending court sessions, holding signs at protests, and sitting in ceremony praying deeply about these things I was just starting to be a part of. I don't take any of that time for granted, and I know that I stand not only on their shoulders, but on the shoulders of so many tribal leaders who would not be led into rooms like this to be graciously received and listened to. I don't take for granted any second of this work we get to do together today, because I know how hard it was for them. The tension and chaos around so much of those tribal-state relations back then certainly echoes into today, because a lot of the same structures and consequences of the unfair policies and politics remain. However, we've started a movement here. We've made some progress, and dare I say, we have hope. The systems in which we are making these changes were instituted with our demise as part of their goal. Many of the leaders in colonial government, when Maine was becoming a state, had wishful thinking that Wabanaki people could be eradicated, that they could get rid of us and not have to deal with us or settle up for the taking of our land, the taking of our children, the taking of our resources, and the taking of a lot of our lives. We've survived an attempted genocide right here, and we've survived so much taking. There's trauma, and there's some deep wounds in our people, in our communities, but there's also so much strength. There's so much determination to keep protecting, to keep persisting, and to keep honoring those who fought so hard so that we could remain not just alive, but intact and knowing who we are and where we come from. Part of honoring those ancestors and all their sacrifices is changing how Wabanaki people are treated in our homelands now called Maine. It is daunting, and it can be a very heavy lift, and we could definitely try to do it alone, but I'm so glad that we don't have to. The panelists here tonight will offer a glimpse into the work that we are doing to bring about fairness, equity, respect, and truth-telling in tribal state relations within the state legislature and beyond. The places where original harms have occurred have the potential to be the places where we make things a little better, little by little. We are doing this slowly and steadily. We have met some of our goals, and we are reaching for new ones with the help of so many leaders in both chambers, in both parties, and thanks to our wonderful Wabanaki Alliance Coalition and allies in all corners of the state. I personally know the dedication and bravery of all of these folks up here, and I'm so happy we all get to engage in conversation and learn more about all of them and the efforts that we are working on together. In closing, I'll mention a couple logistical, practical things. We do have a table out front featuring some materials for our Yes on Question 6 campaign. We can get into that a little bit further, but that is about printing the entirety of the Maine Constitution. And part of that material, while it's in the Constitution, it was amended to be removed from the printed copies, and it has to do with treaty obligations that the state of Maine assumed when it separated from Massachusetts. And those treaty obligations to tribal people, the Wabanaki nations, are important because you need to be a sovereign government to enter into treaties. And so that's very significant for us that that history be available and that the state be transparent about that historical data. And we'll get into that for more detail for sure. We also have an event coming up on Indigenous Peoples Day, Monday, October 9th at the State House at 9:30. Please feel free to come join the Wabanaki Alliance as we celebrate the day, talk about Question 6, and just get together and feel good about being Indigenous and still being here. So with that, I will wrap up. I always like to share a little bit about my path here as a young person, because back then I would get angry and distressed, and you know, it was hard to keep those feelings in check sometimes because things felt very unfair. So I would love to reach back in time and tell my younger self, feel those things, but also feel extremely hopeful, feel inspired, because progress is just around the corner. Kachiwalimani, thank you so much.
Thank you, Ambassador Bryant, as you make your way back to your chair. Good evening. My name is Allison D.A. I'm the director at the Goldfarb Center for Public Affairs, and we are so glad to have you all here. I love that the students have taken the very back rows. Way to go. Hold the back of the room. Appreciate it. Thank you, Ambassador, for your comments. I never tire of hearing, and it always deepens my understanding of the issues that we're working on. And of course, to our panelists, thank you so much for being here. For those of you who don't know, the Goldfarb Center, we work in sort of 3 or 4 actually areas. We work in politics, policy, persuasion, and the press. And so when I work with students, sometimes they'll come and say, well, what is policy? Like, what is public policy? You talk about it. And I like to say it's really just a fancy word for rules. It's the rules of how we govern our society, our community. And one of the things I want to work with our students on, and that we're committed to at Goldfarb, is thinking about who's been in the room when the rules are made and who hasn't been in the room. And so part of our commitment to programming is having conversations like the one we're going to have tonight, because for historically in this country, many groups have been excluded, but we particularly want to acknowledge that Black and Indigenous voices have most often not been at the table when public policy decisions are being made. And so we looked at tonight as an opportunity for us to continue that conversation, not just to deepen our understanding, but to think about how we can take action to remedy and rectify those situations. So thank you for joining us in this conversation, and we look forward to many more in the future. I'm playing moderator, but really this is an evening for you all. So I have a couple of questions to get us kicked off, and then I'm going to turn it over to our audience. Those of you who know me know I love to talk, so I promise if you don't have questions, I'm going to go right back at it. But we do want this to be a conversation. So with that, let's get started. Representative Dana. One of the things we talk about at the Goldfarb Center is how do we give examples to students who are coming into sort of their political life now, examples of where people can come together, maybe have different perspectives, but can actually work together to come up with solutions. And my understanding is that you, although you are new to the legislature, have a particularly strong ability to forge relationships maybe across different issues. And I'd love to hear more about how has that been for you coming into the legislature, and sort of what can you share about how you do it so well?
First of all, I'll have to lead with I'm a sibling of 12. So, to be able to navigate through that with a bunch of different perspectives, a bunch of different backgrounds, it definitely, came natural to me because of, being part of such a large family. But the biggest thing is like, I was really raised by my grandmother as well, and my grandmother always taught me about how to lead forward in our traditional sense. Always give people respect, always listen to what they have to say, listen to them fully through before you speak on behalf of what you believe in whatever topic might be ahead of you. So, I give a lot of my, that ability to my grandmother and the way that I was raised, being brought up in our culture and our traditional beliefs. And, coming into your own and coming into, I'm still, new to state politics and being a tribal representative, but I also have a history of tribal politics. But coming into your own and moving forward in politics is about doing the right thing, being, standing up for what you believe in, and following through with that, following through with what you say you want to do. And then also, taking that time to listen to other people's perspectives, and then willing to work through a compromise with them, if your beliefs or the way you want to move forward doesn't necessarily line up.
I can see why you do it so well. Ambassador Bryant, one of the things that I've been talking with students about and asking them is, what does sovereignty mean to you? Or do we even know what it means? And I was, because I'm now in an academic institution, I have to quote a paper because that's what we do at academic institutions. But I was reading this article, Harvard Kennedy article by Joseph Kalt and Joseph Singer, and I thought this was really interesting, is that this sovereignty is not a set of special rights. Rather, its roots lie in the fact that Indian nations pre-exist the United States, and their sovereignty has been diminished but not terminated. Tribal sovereignty is recognized and protected by the U.S. Constitution, legal precedent, and treaties, as well as applicable principles of human rights. Now, this was written in 2004, and I think the awareness and understanding of sovereignty has gone even further. But I would love to hear from you about how the Wabanaki people think about this sovereignty in a much larger context than just maybe one bill in the legislature. I mean, how is this movement moving through the community?
How come she gets the easy questions?
I did the podium thing. These chairs are so comfortable. It's so nice. So it's a great question, and I think sometimes when people hear sovereign, they assume, oh, you just don't want rules. You don't want people telling you what to do. You want it, the carte blanche, whatever you want to do on your lands, outside of your lands, you're just gonna build casinos and go crazy. What sovereignty, really means in tribal communities is having that relationship with the federal government, having, normal tribal jurisdiction over our lands, our people, our resources. And I think, further, it's sort of become this sacred thing for us. It's about protecting things. It's about, not ceding our rights. Something that's so important about language, and I correct this when I can, is when people say, well, the state's going to give the tribes sovereignty. How much sovereignty is the state going to give the tribes, and how much sovereignty did it take? We have it. We never gave it up. It's about restoring the recognition of it. And there have been, obviously policies and the Settlement Act, and there have been things that have, set up these systems where we're not allowed to exercise it correctly. But tribal people feel that sovereignty is something we carry with us. And I think looking at other states and how tribes interact with state governments would be such a great thing for folks here in Maine, because we're so used to how things are here, because sovereignty really means acting on a government-to-government level. So, you negotiate with the state and the federal government because you're a nation. So that's really what sovereignty means. And I always think back to court cases, again, when I was a teenager, and at the end of one particularly, bad one for the tribes, there was a march for sovereignty. That's what it was called. And the march was to deliver documents that we were trying not to give the paper mill industry. And it was, I encourage you to look it up, Penobscot Nation and Passamaquoddy versus Great Northern. So we had to give these documents up, and the March for Sovereignty started in Norridgewock, which was a massacre of our people, a site of a massacre of our people in the 1700s, and it ended at the State House. And I remember thinking, well, this doesn't feel very sovereign, having to give these papers up, having to relive where our people were massacred, having to kind of go through this trauma. But then I remember thinking, maybe sovereignty also means protecting what is sacred, even when it's really hard, and even when it feels like you're losing. You just haven't won yet, maybe. So, that's what I feel when I hear sovereign.
Thank you. On a little bit of a different approach, Senator Bennett, you represent a rural community. You're Republican, although you've worked on many bipartisan issues. But I'd love if you could share sort of how you understand this bill to both align with your own sense of where the law should be, and also how you feel that your more rural voters feel about this issue, and from what conversations you had, what can we learn about where the people of Maine are on this issue right now?
Thank you, and I want to say thank you to Colby and the Goldfarb Center for having me here tonight. It's a real honor. I think about sovereignty, and that is really the common theme that I think all people across our country, certainly rural people that I represent, are feeling that their sovereignty is at stake, their personal sovereignty. They feel disparaged, they feel disregarded, they feel disadvantaged, and I think there's a natural affinity for people who feel that way to connect with other people that feel that way. I think we're at a sea change in our politics in this country. I think there's so much discontent, there's so much toxicity, there's so much lack of problem solving to the extent of scoring political points. There are people who are paid very handsomely to keep each other, all of us, at each other's throats rather than finding common ground to solve problems. And so there's a connective tissue here, I think, in my view, toward looking at the history that has led us to this place and seeing the experience of our indigenous population in Maine. And you don't have to read too deep into the history to understand the repeated violations of promises, of treaties, of obligations, the confiscation of assets, the misallocation of funds by Indian agents who had fiduciary obligations that they had. And by the way, this history is not old. I mean, we're not talking 1700s, 1800s. We're talking as recently as 1942, when assets are just taken, and the legislature acquiesced to this. So I think that there is, among a lot of people today, there's this feeling of lack of control, lack of self-determination, lack of sovereignty that is certainly shared by a lot of the people I represent. I'm really happy to see this issue has become a bipartisan, nonpartisan issue. It's interesting. I find that the conversations on my side of the aisle have been a lot more open and understanding of folks. And I think that I'm answering this question this way because I think that Republicans, right of center folks are more receptive to this notion that there are powers that are distant from them. They feel remote, that are governing their lives. And they're not happy about it. and they're trying to get some of that control, some of that sovereignty back. And so it's a common theme in today's world. And I think we're going to have to, as citizens, we're going to have to deal with this reality. So I find the conversations with Republicans, Democrats a lot easier to have on this. I think the reason that we've had strong bipartisan majorities on a lot of these bills is because there is this sensibility. And people are looking forward. They're not looking to back. I mean, it's so frustrating in this LD 2004 you referenced recently that Speaker Talbot Ross sponsored. I co-sponsored it, among others, to go into briefings on it, and the first thing everybody said is, we're not relitigating the past. This isn't about 1980, let's look forward. And then the next words out of their mouth, well, back in 1980, this is the way things happened, and this is why we did that, and then they start bickering with each other about like 1980. People aren't interested in 1980, they're interested in 2023 and beyond. And this is what ordinary people care about. They're not caring about legalisms of the past. They want to build a future.
Speaker Talbot Ross.
Yes.
You advanced this bill. This was an important priority for you as a speaker. And you have spent your career working on issues related to civil rights, to giving voice, as the ambassador said, to people who didn't have a voice. Can you talk to us a little bit about how you see tribal sovereignty connecting with other work? I mean, we heard from, as the ambassador said, from Corey Hinton last night, who was talking about the great connection between many of the African American civil rights leaders and the indigenous leaders who were fighting for sovereignty back in the 1970s, 1980s. So how do you see this work? Both, why is it so connected, and sort of does it connect to the other work you've been doing in the legislature on other issues?
Well, I thank you for the question. I will too add my thanks to the Goldfarb Center, to the provost, acknowledge Chief Newell, Vice Chief Silverboy, Senator LaFontaine, Representative Madigan, Representative White, and I'll just add that the Executive Director for the Permanent Commission on the Status of Racial, Indigenous, and Tribal Populations, Ariel Ritchie, is here as well. I am truly honored to be here and to be on this panel. I think I'll just answer that by telling you a little bit that I am a proud 9th generation Mainer, and I was raised within a household by parents who were raised by others who always saw civil rights through the lens of human rights. And so the way in which I see all of the work that you've named, and the ways in which we access those rights, and the ways in which we ensure that the rights are based on equity and equality and fairness, I see that through a human rights lens, that we have an inherent right to dignity and to live our lives based on simply being human. That there's no one of us is more human or more entitled to the right to live free and with liberty and happiness than anyone else. So I see the work that I do through that lens. It guides me. When you say that bill, I wanted to ask you which one, because I was very, very proud to be able to work with Chief Newell, Vice Chief Sillaboy, the ambassador, representative, the tribal chiefs, to advance a bill that actually started with U.S. Representative Jared Golden, who was trying to move forward a prospective bill, which I think had just a few limitations that we corrected in our state version of the bill, which did include some retroactivity. But we took that inspiration from Representative Golden, who I would add to the list of folks who are championing the idea of self-determination and self-governance for the tribes in Maine. But we took inspiration from that bill in order to address the lack of protections and benefits that the tribes here in Maine have not been able to enjoy, that 570 other tribes across this nation have, resulting in a little over than 150 laws and bills, protections that we have missed. And so when you say with the bill, I think of 2004. I also think about LD 78, and I want to thank Senator Bennett right now for LD 578, which we both sponsored a bill to address Question 6 in the Constitution. But we also have 2007, which is looking at those 22 consensus recommendations that came out of the 2019 task force to move forward. So, as you said, my understanding is there's not any one bill that we're talking about, but we are trying to move forward within that human rights lens, within that lens. And in order to honor, as Dr. King has said, the original sin was in the founding of the United States, in which there was a genocidal attack on the indigenous native populations. But this package of bills is really about what the ambassador said, and that is to recognize the restoration, the sovereignty, self-determination, and self-governance of the Wabanaki nations. And so I approach it through the lens of human rights.
Thank you. One of the many things that the Goldfarb Center is grateful for is our faculty advisory board and our student executive board, who partner with us on many things, including, I'm hoping we have 2 students who will be running mics for people as we ask questions. I see at least Audrey here. I'm not sure who's our second, but I would love to open it up for questions. And Audrey has one, and do we have our second student? Grace is going to do it. Fantastic. And so if you want to put up your hand, Audrey or Grace will bring you a microphone so everyone can hear, and we can open it up. And if not, I'm ready to keep going. So let's see. Oh, over Grace, we have someone over here in the middle. Thank you. Last night at the lacrosse event, I don't want to stress you out, but they were bolting. They were running. It was like a sporting event.
I think that's on, okay. I'm kind of confused about this. I'm from Oklahoma, and I'm Cherokee. We have our own council, we have our own courts, we have our own systems, but we work very close with the state on the political issues that do arise when you have sovereign nations bordering each other. But I never felt strange about that until I came to Maine. I've been in Maine since 1970, and at that time, it was kind of strange that there weren't any Native Americans in my class. there weren't any things going on, because I was used to the gatherings of the public and going in and doing things. And that's what I felt weird. Then the land settlement came, and I thought, wow, I could sell my land? Wait a minute. No, but it wasn't that, of course not. But then I thought, well, that's weird. Why are they buying, what are they selling? And then I found out they're selling their sovereignty. Your councils don't mean anything to those of us that's not living there. And there was a divide that occurred during that time. And then people got scared. Oh my gosh, make them a sovereign nation. What are they going to do? I mean, I lived in Oklahoma all my life, and we had no problems going from the Choctaw Nation over to Norman and then going over to the Shawnee Nation. You know, there weren't any roadblocks or anything like that, because they all worked together with the state government to make sure that things ran smoothly, and it did. So I think a lot of this has to do with, how can I say, unfounded fear of those that are unknown. But now, recently I've seen that they're having powwows, they're having things for the public to attend and learn about that. My cousins and I have a long-standing conversation with that. But it's made it more comfortable. I pass as European, blonde hair, blue eyes. I take after that other side of my family. But that's what I'm saying. I see it as a fear where people don't understand what it is that they're really hearing. They think sovereign nation, they think, oh, now then they're going to get nuclear war, they're going to get nuclear weapons, and they're going to, they've seen too many movies about this. And that's what you're fighting against in a lot of ways, is that mindset of people that don't know you. And I think was part of my confusion even. But I do want to say that I really appreciate the Penobscot Nation. My daughter used to go there and make dolls with Ruth Francis, and she has a whole collection of them. She loves them. She did, until she passed away. But these are the things that everyone's going, you went up there? Why? Well, she's making dolls. She's staying there? I mean, to me that was like, yeah, where is she gonna stay? They're not gonna leave her on the street. But that's what I'm saying, where you're fighting against I don't even know if there's a basis for that kind of fear other than just the unknown. And I think that's what I've seen at any rate. Is that anything that you've seen?
Representative Dana, do you want to react to that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, I would agree with you that it's the fear of the unknown. You know, because as the tribes, the Wabanaki tribes here in the state of Maine, you moved here in the 70s, and they already had an established relationship with the state in Oklahoma. We were considered as wards of the state until 1975, until we went through a sovereignty lawsuit that went through the court systems that actually gave us our sovereignties. And this was even before the Land Claim Settlement Act. You know, and it was because of some of that conversations and stuff that had happened that kicked off the start for the Land Claim Settlement Act. And, you know, and pushing the Implementing Act in '79 and the Land Claim Settlement Act of 1980. But when it really comes down to it, I mean, even, like it was mentioned earlier, you know, some of the signing of the Land Claim Settlement Act was actually under duress and fear. Also, the leaders that we had at the time, you know, all during that time period, because of just the opportunities that we had on the reservation, being rural for the most part, is that a lot of even our tribal leaders at the time, chiefs and councils, did not have even a high school education. A lot of them had to, because of the lack of the education system that was available to the reservations during those time periods before the Land Claim Settlement Act, we just had a lack of education. We didn't have the opportunity to move forward. Not only that, and when I refer back to, or going back to when I say that we were signed under duress, was because of the change of the presidential election that was coming up, saying, one party was saying, one group that was leaving office was saying that the next office is not going to support our rights and our human and civil rights moving forward, and that we were under the assumption that we would lose everything, the little bit that we had, which was everything to us, even though it was only very minimal at the time. So, and there's some other factors that had played in too on the signing of that. But yeah, some of the language was strategically placed and put in there during the time of the signing of the Land Claim Settlement Act, which made us, or put us into that realm of debating with the state if we're a municipality or a sovereign nation. And that's a fight that we've been fighting ever since the day that we signed the Land Claim Settlement Act and the day that it passed through Congress. There's some documentation, I can't reference it right where it's at right now, but there's documentation that our leaders were fighting that after the fact, because once it was officially explained to them what they had signed into, it was already too late because they had rushed it right through Congress, and they didn't realize that how much of their rights and their sovereignty they were signing away at the time. Hence why we've been fighting this since the signing and the enactment of the Maine Indian Land Claim Settlement Act.
Might we have a student question? And then you, Jen, then a professor question. Yeah. We love the tradition of students engaging.
Don't be scared.
All right, I'll give you a chance to think of it while Professor Yoder has a question for us. Audrey, could you please bring that? Thank you.
Have they ever agreed?
Have they never agreed, and do you see any path forward for agreement? What's up?
I can start with that hot potato and pass it.
I'll take it.
So I think that, I can't, expound too much on the resistance from Governor Mills because a lot of times it's very broad and very vague. So lately it's been getting more specific, which is good. And really the main themes are, if the tribes get increased, ability to be self-determined and all this sort of thing and get any more rights, then there's going to be confusion and nobody will know what rules and what laws are on which land, and there'll be this, checkerboard of tribal land and state land, and nobody will know which laws apply, and there'll be litigation. And I appreciated the last comment about, hey, in Oklahoma we go from here to here to here, and it's not a big deal, and everybody figures it out. That's the way it would be here too, we believe. So I think that the land claims era, the state believed they did a pretty great thing because they maintained a whole lot of control, settled this big lawsuit, and kind of kept the tribes where they wanted us. And I think that a lot of people, credit those negotiators and make them heroes. And I think that sometimes the governor feels pride in some of those, things that happen, because I find her to be very proud of where she comes from, and I can certainly empathize with that and see where she's coming from on that. I think that the resistance is really hard to pinpoint, and a lot of us have tried. And I think it comes down to a lot of the comments about fear, and that's not on the governor, that's on this broader thinking. We've seen it from Senator King as well, protecting a lot of this kind of Maine nostalgia and things of that era. And if the tribes, regain anything, maybe that era won't be seen as so great, or the Settlement Act will not have a great legacy. And the sad part is the Settlement Act already doesn't have a great legacy, and we're trying to fix it, and we really want to work together on it.
I might take a stab at that. I don't like to speculate. However, I will say this, an observation. The governor has a very long-standing relationship with the Office of the Attorney General. Actually, she served as Attorney General for 8 years. Prior to that, she served in the Attorney General's office before she was a prosecutor in Western Maine and a state legislator. And the Attorney General's office seems to have a great hostility to revisiting the Land Claims Settlement Act of 1980. I think it's a cultural issue within the Attorney General's office, and it's pretty deep-seated. And the other aspect is, the one thing I've observed about the governor is that she has no reverse. If she takes a position, arguments will change, facts will change, conditions will change. She stays where she is. I've seen this on repeated issues. And I agree with Ambassador Bryant. I think it's unfortunate that there's this really, what to me is a really disturbing strain emerging in our civil polity, which is that if someone wins, I lose. And this is fundamentally against the American tradition, that out of diversity, e pluribus unum, we can become stronger. We can actually create more than the sum of the parts if we lean on each other, if we celebrate our differences and actually empower each other. Everybody's better off. And I'm really disturbed by this notion that win, lose. You win, I lose. And I do think that it underlies some of the thinking that creates the fear and the uncertainty and the doubt about change, making this change, which to me seems commonsensical. I can see a bigger pie. I can see better opportunities, not only for Wabanaki people, but also for their neighbors, the people that I represent, people throughout rural Maine, throughout all of Maine, will be better off if the Wabanaki, and there was a study out of Harvard University recently that underscored this, that particularly the lack of getting the access to the federal legislation has held not only the Wabanakis back, but the whole Maine economy back. Why are we doing this?
So, following up to, and I agree with a lot that was said right there. And some of, I again, like I'll repeat too and take the same stance as I can't speculate. But one of the things that I'd like to say is that, anything that we bring up, especially when it comes to the Land Claim Settlement Act, when it comes to the beneficiaries, when it comes to our implementing act, when we talk about any possible change or any revision, our biggest thing that we're up against is it's unconstitutionally vague, and I'd like to reverse that and put that right back on the governor and ask her, say that her stance and reasoning why the revisions are unconstitutionally vague, well, give us, a definitive answer of why it's so unconstitutionally vague. And we've asked that, in a different sense, I guess, many times, and we've never gotten an answer. So I think it, really just boils down to back winning and losing. But give us a defined answer. Tell us why, you're in opposition of it, instead of going in a roundabout way of saying, I'm just not going to do this. And I'm not going to let you guys move forward in a good way. The real answer is on her. And that's all we can ask for at this moment, unless, everybody unites right across the state, bipartisan, whether it's left wing, right wing, or just take away any wing and make us the whole bird, and fly forward and doing the right thing. So.
I would ask, it was when we talk about this sort of the bipartisan effort and progress that you made, it seems like momentum is growing, right? That the wings, there are more wings, right, coming on. And so I know we have a lot to talk about what's happened, but where do we see this going? Where do we see this movement going? I'm hearing so much about the importance of deep relationship, of listening, of conversation, of hearing similarities amongst voters who may, on the surface, look very different, but actually share deep values. So where do you all see this movement taking us? I know the short session is coming. You've got some bills already, but both specifically and as a larger state of Maine, how do we see this going, given that the governor, your statement that the government doesn't go in reverse?
Your turn. What I'd like to acknowledge is just the progress that has been made, I think, both in the 130th legislature through getting LD 1626, which brought forward the consensus recommendations, through both chambers, was as far as we had been able to take the issue of sovereignty forward in the state. And we were very proud that we were able to get that bill through both chambers with bipartisan support. Moving on to the 131st legislature, this year, we put LD 2004 on the governor's desk. It had strong bipartisan support in the House and the Senate. We had the 2/3 based on those votes. And those two bills, the prospective, the Federal Beneficial Act bill, and what we call the Tribal Sovereignty Bill, we got those bills passed. So I think the state of Maine, I think the people of Maine should be very proud of the fact that there is a movement afoot, that we are understanding what that original social contract in 1790 was about when the Commonwealth passed along and the state of Maine was then created in 1820. I think the people of Maine are ready. I believe that the movement has educated Mainers. I believe that the movement has empowered Mainers to see that it is not us versus them, that the benefit of this is to Maine, period. The benefit is to Maine. And I think that the movement has done a great job of educating both the legislature and the public. Where we need to continue to go is to build off that progress and to understand that this is possible within this next year of the state legislature. I fully expect that we will get this work over the line. In what form, I do not know. In what LD, I do not know. But I fully expect that we will take one more step in the right direction, being led by the state legislature and supported by Maine people. It feels that
it's not just that the time has come, it's that we deserve more and better. We deserve more and better. It's not the time has come. Maine deserves to be proud, once again, of its relationship with the Wabanaki nations, and to honor that and to move forward in that relationship with all the dignity that was part of the existence of the Wabanaki since time immemorial.
I just, to respond to your question, I think, as the speaker said, there's several pieces of legislation that are available. I have to revisit the 130th legislature, though. LD 1626, which was the Tribal Sovereignty Bill, as she said, went through committee, was engrossed in the House, engrossed in the Senate, was enacted in the House, and came to the Senate for final enactment. Now, if a bill has a fiscal note of any size whatsoever before final enactment in the Senate, it goes to this thing called the Special Appropriations Table. This bill had a fiscal note of $26,000. It went to the appropriations table. The Senate, so the normal process would be the Appropriations Committee, on which I now serve. I did not in the last legislature when this was being considered. The Appropriations Committee will vote a bill like that off, and it will come up to the Senate for final enactment, and then we'd have a vote, and it would go to the governor's desk. Notwithstanding the fact that a majority of state senators said they supported the Tribal Sovereignty Bill, LD 1626, that bill stayed on the Appropriations Committee. It languished on the Appropriations Committee. It was so appalling to me that I stood up on the floor of the Senate and I moved to suspend the rules, because the only person that can move to take a bill off the Appropriations Committee is a member of the Appropriations Committee under the rules. There are 3 senators who are members of the Appropriations Committee. I asked each one of them if they would please move that off the appropriations table so that we could have a vote in the Senate, knowing that it would go to the governor's desk, where she had already stated she would veto it. I couldn't get any one of them to do it, so I stood up on the floor of the Senate. I moved to suspend the rules and take that bill off the appropriations table, knowing it was a 2/3 vote. I didn't even get a majority. So the executive has a lot of power in Maine. Whoever's in that office doesn't need the legislature to see yet more power and give them a pass on an issue of this importance. That bill should have been on her desk. She should have vetoed it. There should have been a public debate over the veto then, and I hope to God that this year we actually end up with that bill vetoed so that we can debate it, and the public will benefit from that. So a little bit of sausage making in Augusta, but this is what we deal with.
Oh, now we got the hands.
I don't need a microphone.
I just want to make sure that people at home can hear who are watching, so thank you. Thank you, Jenna.
Hi, this is a delicate question, but I wonder if there was ever any consideration of inviting Governor Mills to attend this panel.
Thank you for the question, and I'll answer that. As I mentioned, one of the things that I felt was important as we work with students and engage with them is to find opportunities for us to have conversations that don't end up with one side debating the other side and using the same lines over and over again where no one is actually listening. And so it was important to me that we have a conversation and hear from folks with different backgrounds, different political persuasions, to hear why they supported a bill. The governor is always welcome at Colby and is always welcome to come talk about sovereignty, and absolutely will be invited to do so. But I think, and I believe it is important that we have opportunities where it isn't soundbite after soundbite, and we can hear from people who are talking about how they think about really complicated public policy issues. So that is why this panel is here today in this format, and Goldfarb will always continue to invite many different voices, many different perspectives on lots of different issues. I think I saw Karen and then in the front.
Thank you. I appreciate the sausage making. And I would say to everybody in the audience, it's incumbent upon you to talk to your legislators and to pay attention to sausage making, because this stuff happens in the middle of the night. It happens when we're not paying attention. So I think that you heard about the Wabanaki Alliance. I would strongly suggest that you sign up. And I hope that you're going to talk a little bit about question 6, because it's incumbent on everybody here to vote yes, so that we print our Constitution, and that you talk to your friends and explain this, because I don't think that there's ever a lot of money that goes into explaining a lot of referendum questions, except for that stupid one about the pine tree, which I'm so tired of seeing the other side talking about. But in any case, it's really our responsibility, people who are allies, to be aware of what is happening when the sausage is being made and making your voices heard.
I think we had another question. Does anyone want to speak more to question 6? I know we have people outside who will be able to talk about it, but
Yeah, vote yes.
okay.
Well, I'll just say this. It's been referenced a couple of times, and Speaker Talbot Ross and I both put in bills. Her number was 78. I was 578, so you can see who was the early bird. But they did the identical same thing, and I suggested to the committee that they'd probably be better served by using the Speaker's bill rather than mine. But basically, there's a short section of the Maine Constitution. This isn't new constitutional language. This is existing constitutional language. A short paragraph that explains the treaty obligations that the new state of Maine inherited from Massachusetts, but in the 1870s, in some sort of weird transaction I won't get into, the legislature of Maine decided to pass a constitutional amendment to prohibit the printing of that paragraph in published copies of the Maine Constitution, even though it is part of the Maine Constitution.
Full effect.
Full effect. And so this is just absurd in the modern age that you would be told constitutionally that you can't print the Constitution. So we put forward this idea to change that and simply change, and it passed overwhelmingly bipartisan, like, of course, it's a no-brainer. It is now, because it's a constitutional amendment, it needed 2/3 of the House, 2/3 of the Senate, and ratification by a majority vote of all of us as a people. So that's why it's one of 4 constitutional amendments on the ballot this year. There's 8 questions on the ballot. The first 4 are citizens-initiated referenda. The next 4 are constitutional amendments that the legislature voted on a 2/3 basis to put before you for ratification.
And the governor testified in opposition to printing
The Constitution.
the full articles, Article 10, which is the Articles of Separation. The governor testified in opposition to that bill.
I think we have time for one more question. Are there any students who would like to ask a question before? Not that I don't love the engaged community. I do. I think we have a student question over here.
I guess this is a question for all of you, both those who dedicate your work to public service and those for whom this is a much more existential part of your community. how do y'all take care of yourselves? Like, whether you're fighting making sausage or fighting for your rights, like, what are the things you do to keep up hope and keep fighting? Because this seems kind of like soul-sucking work when it gets shot down again and again and again.
Sure. Do I seem like I take care of myself? So as I mentioned in my intro, I've been kind of, the bug bit me really early on a lot of this stuff. I was a teenager sorting through a lot of this. I got activated about Indian mascots and changing Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day. I started really thinking about what's fair and what makes me angry and what seems harmful to our people. And because I think I had so many emotions and worked through a lot of that stuff, it pushed me to think about things from an intellectual place, a rational place, and to learn about these policies and the history and why are things this way. And I think that knowledge is super empowering. So when I get to a place where it's totally like bashing your head against a wall, I think if you think back to that core knowledge and knowing that you're making progress, so that's all on the surface. I think at a personal level, you really have to find the things that you're working for. So I have 3 children. My youngest is 16 months, and then I have 2 teenagers. They're 14 and 16. So because I have that spread, I'm kind of constantly thinking about what the world's going to be like in 10 years for my big girls, and then in 20 years for my little baby. So I think as Indigenous people, a lot of times we think generations down the road. So I talked a lot in my intro about my ancestors who, nobody listened to them. They were always wanting to be heard. It seemed when you moved to Maine in 1970, you didn't know tribes were here, right? We were. Our people were. They were having the celebrations. They were having the ceremonies. They were in community doing things, and just so silenced and so pushed aside. So when I think about the fact that I get to sit up here and be heard and engage with you and promote these issues and work with these wonderful people on these things, that progress is part of the self-care. When you can look at those results, even when a lot of them don't feel good and it's frustrating and you're kind of constantly explaining the same thing over and over, the fact that all of these little pebbles, they really do spread and they add up and these ripples go places. There's folks in here tonight that worked with me over in Skowhegan when we worked on that mascot. So, I've seen a few of you. Those relationships are so lasting and soul feeding when things can get hard.
I would say, I keep reminding myself that, nothing is ever set in stone in our journey that we're on as a country, as a state, that it's a process and it's a journey of progress, and it has twists and turns, and you just follow that arc toward justice, as a wise person called it. You just keep pushing, and you just realize you're part of a story. And I have to say, because this is likely the last time I get to say anything, is that my wife Karen, who's here with me, and I had the wonderful experience this August, thanks to Chief Newell of Sipayak, of taking the ancestral paddle from Indian Township to Sipayak over 2 days down the St. Croix River, across the Grand Fall flowage, and spent a night in a rainy tent, and being able to have that experience was really inspiring to me, because we were able, my wife and I were able to participate briefly in this wonderful sense of tradition, respect, and community that we were visiting. We were visitors, but we felt so welcome. And I think about this in terms of advancing the understandings. I mean, that I wish more people would do that and avail themselves of these opportunities. We attended Passamaquoddy Days, and it's really a wonderful experience to have that that glimpse of, yeah, this is a sovereign people. You know, this is a special community. It's not my community, but it's a welcoming community, and I think those are the sorts of experiences personally that make it keep me going.
I was on that trip with him, and
how'd I do?
he did an amazing job. I was doing great with my Johnson 40 horse, and my Shasta, you know. So I'm glad he got the full experience of that. No, I'm just playing, but no, you know, adding on to that, you know, I mean. I guess for me and myself, you know, for your question, you know, as I look to my faith, my spirituality, and my beliefs and where I come from. You know, I use a lot of that. You know, in our traditions, we pray and give thanks for everything. You know, and I pray and I give thanks for the opportunity to stand up for my people, to fight for our rights, to fight for who we are, to, you know, so that people will hear us. And luckily, I'm loud. So, you know, I make it a point that you know, that people are going to be able to hear us. But, you know, also, and I look at it from this perspective, right, is that there's this saying that only the strong will survive. Well, when I look back at what my people have been through and what we've endured since first contact, and even before first contact, I'm a superhuman being. You know, not just me, but, you know, like my people, the Wabanaki people, we're superhumans now, if that's the true story of you know, that only the strong survive. So I take that into consideration when I stand up and work forward for the rights of my people. Is, you know, my ancestors fought hard and died for me to be sitting here today in front of everybody. Now I want to be that ancestor down the road when my grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and great-grandchildren after that look back and they see what I did for the Passamaquoddy people. And not just me, but what we did as Wabanaki people in general. And it doesn't even have to be my name specifically, but I want our future generations to look at us and be like, they fought for us, they struggled for us. And I just want to be who they were before me.
I think what Representative Dana's not telling you is he has this extraordinarily wonderful sense of humor, and you've seen some of it. It is why he's been able to do so much good work in the state legislature and build solid relationships with everyone. Whether elected or not, staff, visitor, is that he's got this wonderful energy and a great sense of humor that just keeps all of us going. So I just want to acknowledge that. But in the ways that you've all talked about it, you know, as I look at Vice Chief Sillaboy, it is about that resiliency, right? And taking care of yourself is this work. If I was taught that if I didn't contribute something, that I would not have a good life. I would have a lonely life. You have a responsibility to take care of yourself and one another, and it is about that resiliency. But you know, the good, bad, there are really bad days, I will say, very challenging days. But it is such a privilege and an honor to do this work. There are times, and I'm sure this happens to you, that, you know, I can drive up to the State House and I just stand in awe of the building. It's just so beautiful to me that I tease people that every day that I go in, I'm pretty sure they might have changed the lock. I put my pass on there. I'm like, wow, I get to, they're gonna let me in again today. And I'll leave there at night sometimes just totally exhausted, and just look at the beauty. The State House is in lights, and you just look at this and you feel so much pride, and just so honored that you're able to do this job. It's an enormous amount of humble pie every day, because you know that what you're doing is trying to make Maine, the lives of Mainers better, and that's not just about you, not just about the people on your block, not just about your district, but all Maine lives. We are trying to improve, and so I would just say that doing this work is self-care, because you wake up every day and you try to do your best, and you go home at night with hope that tomorrow will be better.
I want to thank you all so much for being with us tonight. I want to thank the students who are here. I hope that we could not have more wonderful role models for you to see folks who are engaged in your community. I hope that you take the lessons from their strength and perseverance and their commitments. This Colby community is a special place, and it's special because of you all, and we're so glad that you took the time to be here. To our Waterville community and beyond, we're so glad to have you back. And we're so glad that you're a part of this conversation with us, and we look forward to more of those conversations. And to our panelists, I just want to thank you for modeling what is the most inspiring in our community, is when we find ways to learn about each other, to develop deep relationships, to understand that disagreement doesn't mean you can't find connection, and to find ways to work together to build community as we move forward. So thank you all so very much.